it's the same pie that we're all having. Both agencies, both organizations. We're both trying to get people to go to austere environments and do something bigger than themselves. And the mission for me was the same. So overall, my end goal was the same: is how do I get people from A to B?
Hello, this is Tab Bartley, and you are listening to the Oath We Took podcast, the show that tells the Marine Corps story through the Marines that served. I'm joined today by Joe Nava. He is the reason for this podcast. I know so many amazing Marines who hesitate to tell their stories. Their stories hold so much power and so many life lessons. Oftentimes, though, they go untold. Not every Marine story is the same. What is the same is the oath we all took. I have to say how excited I am. And I know we were talking about this before, but I literally started this podcast so that I could get Marines I knew on the podcast to share their story, especially I think in our MOS of public affairs. Oftentimes we don't share our stories. And I was joking with, and I'm trying not to call you like Staff Sergeant Nava because that's what I'm used to.
You
But
call me whichever you like. I just know how to respond to either one. Yeah, and when you send that invite out, I absolutely wanted to take you up on it and just meet with you and chat about the good, the bad, and everything else in between of why we did what we did and we do what we do now. So
And I
definitely.
think and for anybody who knows me, and I feel like obviously at this point, people probably know me and know like, so recruiting duty is where I got like the blunt Bartley. And I can't count the amount of times that at that time, Staff Sergeant Nava, there would be something and I would send him an email and I would be like, can I send this? And he'd be like, no, you can't. In the nicest way. I suggest you doing it like that. It was some like super tactful, and it's just like, oh, so I fully like we'll get into it more, but like I greatly appreciate your leadership, the way you led, and especially with me, I think I learned so much from you, especially from tact and like those type of things that I severely needed. So
I
with
wouldn't say
that,
needed. I say we redirected that energy to a more positive outcome for you. That's what we
I
were aiming for.
I love that. Yes, I will go with that. So with that, I'll ask the first question, which is, why did you decide to join the Marine Corps?
You know, that question's always so funny because I joined the Marine Corps to escape uh, a paradise. Honestly, like everybody goes in vacations in Southern California, and I mean, I just talked about it even during the intros of the educators workshop. You know, I lived down the street from San Diego, so people were like, "Why'd you want to leave Southern California?" Well, I wanted to see the world. And I know it's a very selfish thing to do, but I did, and I still do. And the way I grew up, I didn't actually have the capability to do so. So I saw the military as an opportunity for me. And my uncle was already a Marine, and I kind of already locked me in that path. Um, so essentially, I went to him to all the pull programs when he was recruiting down in Orange County, and just participated in everything there. And one thing led to another, and I just signed up. I was very fortunate that when I did sign up, that there was a position open for our MOS field. At that time, the 43 field, because I was doing this high school editor position. So I was a high school newspaper editor, and I was just running that show there. And I was getting a little bored with with that because I already knew everybody there, and I was already a senior, and I was on my way out the door, and this opportunity landed there on my feet, and I didn't want to continue my academic career at that point. So I was like, you know what? Let me go learn other people's stories. Let me go learn a little bit more about the world, and how that operates. And I raised my hand and ended up in San Diego about a year later.
And what was your first duty station?
Funnily enough, it was MCRD San Diego. So I went to boot camp thinking, oh,
That.
I'll go to Pendleton. It was like '07. I was like, I'll go to Pendleton. I think they just did the second push in the Fallujah. My buddies I went to MOS school were already going out there in the outfield. So I was like, let me do my time. And then I sit down with the schoolhouse admin, and they're like, yeah, you're going to San Diego. I was like, great, Pendleton, Miramar, where? And they're like, nah, I think a little further south. I was like, well, Miramar is south of Pendleton, right? And they're like, no, you're going to San Diego, MCRD. And I was like, fantastic. What am I going to be doing there? He said, well, your job, what you trained in and what you did. And at the time, I did not quite enjoy that because, again, we were in the middle of the conflict of OIF, and I wanted to do my part. But then as I stayed in San Diego more and I saw the recruit training and the community relations and media programs that we had there, working with some of the more seasoned and Marines on the enlisted and officer side, I learned that we all do have our part to play. And though at the time being young, I didn't see it, reflecting on it now definitely provided that insight, showing that I was able to guide like educators or for our partnership and education program out there in San Diego, where drill instructors went to local schools, how they saw the Marine Corps and how we built that pipeline for them. That way, if eventually they wanted to become a Marine themselves, they had that opportunity, they had the knowledge. Um, Plus, I got to be the mascot handler for the dog. At that time, was Molly Marine.
Oh,
Um, and she was my
yes.
roommate, which was a whole different ball game there. Uh, but yeah, San Diego MCRD was my first duty station.
That's so cool. And I feel like that's such a trend, at least, with our MOS, especially back then, so many of us were like, it was like if we weren't deployed, like what was the point of our job? Like what were we doing? I felt like so many of us in that era, especially were just like womp womp if you got anywhere else where it's like, well, I can't deploy, especially first duty station. But I think, like you said, I feel like with those like recruiting stations or these bases that have all of these opportunities, it's such a good baseline to start your career. I think like the variety of things you get to experience.
Absolutely, I took every opportunity there to further enhance my skills that actually pay me dividends now in my federal career. Like if I was deployed, yeah, I would learn all the deployment things that I needed to do, and on the Marine side, the green side of things of operating. But would I have engaged with the media as I did, or build that community relations aspect and that understanding, that strategic and operational understanding of these communications plans? I don't think I would have. I would have been out there, getting the story, getting the content, telling their story, and building, enriching my own experience, but I would have been lacking that operational understanding and strategic understanding of why we do what we do is important. Because I mean, as well as I do, the Marine Corps has been fighting for its existence for its whole existence, and they have a damn good PR team, be it internal or external. People root for the Marine Corps, and that was what I learned in San Diego is that we have to fight for what we believe in on both sides, just to make sure that we continue to exist, and there is value in all of that.
And I think one of the things you did so well, and you this was like your leadership personality or traits as well, is where you did it in a transparent way. Yeah, you're a great communicator, great like with all of that, but it was like a transparent. It wasn't a scripted, like here's just these like things I need to say type thing. And I think with that, there's just a with that transparency, there's an authenticity that it's also then more it's believable, one, because it is, but two, like it legitimately comes across that way.
I've had leaders where you said it was scripted, even amongst us internal officers. I mean, at the time, cell phones were dumb phones, so they couldn't track everything you said or whatever, right? But they still were out there, like they were talking to the families of Family Day or the crowds or the media. And it's like it's just us. We're your Marines, or we're Marines together. We're peers. Just be you. I know how you are. Just be that. And I took that and tried to apply it as much as possible. And I'm glad that it came through, because I do it now with the people in the Peace Corps. So I have to tailor it back a little bit just to make sure that I don't um that I'm not too marine in that aspect with them. But they do appreciate that as well. And I wanted to be transparent, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because essentially that helps us become better communicators, because we know that if you're going through a tough time, or there's something weighing you down, we can either elevate in the aspects that you're deficient in, or we can strengthen those other aspects to make sure that we can work on the other things later. And being transparent gets that buy-in from not just subordinates, it's from leaders and peers as well, because they understand you're all in it together. We all have the same goal, and we're not fighting amongst each other to reach that goal. We're working together to reach that goal. So I'm
And it
glad again that I was able to do
no,
that.
for sure. And I was going to say, like, and I, I knew you at the end of your career. So when do you feel like, at what point in your career did you feel like you kind of like really started developing that, where like maybe you were conscious of it or you were conscious that it was happening? Because I don't feel like it was something that you were so much maybe conscious. I don't think you did it on purpose, on purpose. I think again, because you were being yourself. But at what point did you realize that that was kind of like what was working? Because again, like, I think what you said, it like it resonated so much because it was like when people are like ups and downs and like really good at some other things, you were very good at helping at least the Marines, in sixth district. Like, what are your strengths? Okay, really utilize that, but hey, let's work on this that you're not as strong of. Or, oh, I know you're going through a lot right now. Well, then focus on this thing that I know you easily can do and do what you have to with the other to meet the requirement, but like don't sit in there. Like don't sit in that, which I think I had a lot of those moments and like calls to you where it's just like do what you need to do and just like go to the next thing. Do
Yeah.
you know like when in your career that you really felt like you had developed that or were like consciously doing it? Because it was like by the time that I interacted with you, it was very like I mean that was probably your, I want to say at least for me, your greatest skill set because it had the most impact constantly.
Yeah. You know, I didn't really ever give it any thought because I naturally fell into it. I'm the oldest of 10. So um, I kind of already had a little bit of what I needed to do and guide people along that way, though they would never tell you that I did that to them. But I'm pretty sure I can get a glass of water if I ask for one from them. Um, but I mean, thinking about it, I would like to say, inklings of it started happening when I was at the tail end of my tour in San Diego. Um, when I was already seasoned with educators workshops and knowing how to engage with the other offices and units on the base to make sure that the program was successful, and knowing what they needed from us before they even asked. So that way, when they did ask, like it's done. Let's actually get to the major point of what we're here for. But when I really came into it was actually in RS Indianapolis. Um, and actually, funny enough, the CEO at the time was Major Lance Langfeld, who ended up being the sixth district CEO who just changed over. Great man, awesome man. He's the one that essentially was very transparent with me and led me and provided that guidance and further refined what I was already doing to make sure that I operated that some way. Because at an RS, you're an office of one, you're a shop of one. Um, so when I had to engage with more senior leaders, I had to create that buy-in for them and that with them to make sure that the the events that we were doing was actually something that is important to them and the organization, but it does create an impact on their end. And I didn't want to do it just as a robot because I knew they already thought that we were a spy from headquarters. They were just going to snoop around and report back to the CEO or the XL or heaven forbids the sergeant major, and they're going to come down and roll on them. I was like, no, no, I'm not any of those things. I want to know how I can help you. Like, are they going to ask me? Oh, yeah, but yeah, it went great. They need to work on this thing, but they're doing really good over here. But how can I help you? And I think creating that buy-in from them and that rapport that I had with all the staff and TOs and junior enlisted was really what helped me understand that transparency, that aspect of me being a Marine, but myself shone through and paid well in the end. Though Sergeant Major, he uh he was a very funny man. I always had my office door open, and the way it was in Indianapolis was a long hallway. We were on Fort Benjamin Harrison, and where our old MOS school was. So I saw those buildings as well. But I was at the tail end of the long hallway from the CO's office. So he was on one end, I was on the other end, and people had to bypass my office to get down to the command deck. So Sergeant Major sends out emails, and then checks in with the office periodically. He sent an email out. I forget about what it was, a safety brief, I want to say. And he said, make sure you tell your teams this is what needs to happen and what we need to look out for. So I was like, fine, okay. So I waited till he was just about to cross the threshold of my door and very loudly proclaimed, all right, Sergeant Nava, this is what we got to do. This came straight from Sergeant Major. This is what, make sure we cover on A, B, C, and D. And I just see Sergeant Major poke his head through and go, and keep on walking by. I was like, Roger that, Sergeant Major. He said, brief the team.
How was recruiting duty in Indiana? I mean, being from California and then going back to California, I mean, the Midwest is a different place. And I say that because I am a Hoosier from Indiana. I am literally an
That's one of
hour
the
from
things we definitely
Indianapolis.
discussed.
Yes. Like I can say what I want about Indiana, but how was that recruiting and kind of seeing that world?
Well, so I drove. I drove from San Diego to Indianapolis. So I did my own Diddy move, and I drove this 1973 Chevy Nova. Um, no heat, no AC. I'm like, I just need to get there and then figure out everything else. Luckily, I already knew the Marine I was replacing. Um, he was awesome, and he helped me crash in his place for a little bit when I got there. But as I'm driving through, and I'm leaving what I thought were civilization at the time, because I'm heading through the desert and going over some mountains and hills, and the land started getting flatter and flatter and flatter as I went north and north, and just a bit colder, where I ended up not feeling my fingertips. I'm like, wow, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what's happening, but I just know I have to kind of get to this location, and then from there I'll call and figure out where I need to go. So it was Oklahoma. I went. Those are the last hills I saw. It was in Oklahoma. I get through, and I'm like, all right, it's dark. It's about 7 at night, the end of winter, so it's already still pretty dark around that time. And I see just a glow in the distance, and I'm like, okay, that has to be something. That can't be the next gas station. There needs to be a building that's a brighter glow than I've seen before. And it happened to be Indianapolis. And I got there and was pleasantly surprised of the amenities that were available in Indianapolis, considering that I thought it was just be maybe a horse and buggy and a couple of street lights, maybe a McDonald's or two, but there was much more to it, and I learned that much about the city when I was actually there, that it was at the time the 11th largest city in the U.S., and I had no idea that the impact that Indianapolis had with the transportation industry, with the service industry itself, and the military members and the service members, and the impact the state it had. So it was wild because I had no idea what I was getting into when I got to Indiana. That's when I learned how to play the game cornhole.
Yes.
No idea what it was. And when someone first approached me and said, "You want to play cornhole?" I had to back up a couple of feet and say, "Look, thank you, but no thank you. Not the way I do business." And then they explained what it was. So I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'll play. I'll play the game." And getting to learn more about the Hoosier State and the Hoosiers themselves, and I think being in Indianapolis and Indiana in general helped me slow down the mentality of the West, because the West is always, yeah, it's in movies and TV and mass media, it's always like, hey, let's just chill, hang 10, we're all good here. But they don't show that there's a transition in between where everyone's like rushing to go everywhere and you have to get things done, and then you get to chill. But in Indiana and in the Midwest in general, it's just, hey, I'll get going when I get going. You get that long goodbye, um, that I
Yes.
never mastered. I've never mastered. I was like, hey, I'm done. Bye. And they're like, wait. And 40 minutes later,
Yep,
then
40.
I'm done.
And I think that's one of the coolest things about, and I know we've had other MPAs, but in case anybody's listening who doesn't, this is so public affairs or comstrat or communications field has this additional billet that they can do, where it's a one-man band. They go to a recruiting station and they handle all of the public affairs, all the public relations, all the community relations, media relations, marketing. I mean, they literally cover all of it. And it's such a unique thing because most of these individuals who go, this is their first independent duty. First time, not living on base potentially or that. And then they get immersed in, depending on where they are, but normally it's kind of like that whole state or sometimes multiple states and like their culture and things. And so it's a really cool experience, especially when you go somewhere again that you do not know, which was like me to South Carolina. Like I did not know anything about the South either. And so it's really cool. And I think it's really cool to see. And I think it has a really good impact. And you are one of the few that not only survived it, thrived with it, and then stayed in the Marine Corps, because there's also a kind of like when you go on this billet, you tend to get out of the Marine Corps for a multitude of reasons, but it's just kind of like a funny-ish coincidence. And so you were one of the very few that actually went back into the Marine Corps, and you were able to bring all of that knowledge to the Marine Corps.
You know, there were a couple of times that I considered taking up a job with like the Pacers or the Colts because of the deals that we had with them, and oh man, would have been so good. But I didn't do it because I still needed that commitment that I had within myself to serve the Marine Corps and serve that capacity. The money would have been so good. Um, Plus, I mean, I liked the by the time I left Indianapolis, I liked the scene that was there. I used to go to the state fair every year, go to the Indy 500, and all those things a typical Hoosier may have done or had the capability to do. I would do those, and I enjoyed them immensely. Um, but I had to come back. I felt I needed to come back, and then I received orders to Okinawa. Um, so going from San Diego to Indianapolis in the Midwest, and then flying back overseas to Okinawa, that was a little bit of a whirlwind. I didn't know what to expect, but I was happy that I got to get to an operational unit. Um, and I think at that time I was a senior sergeant, or a more seasoned sergeant, so I was able to get the mission from the CO and basically figure out the tactical applications that I needed to do in order to achieve that goal. But the greatest thing that I could have brought was applying that to a team. So before I left, when I got my orders, I had about 6 months left on our MPA duty. I applied each each little evolution of an event as I would be briefing a team of Marines, because I was treating the RSS staff as a little team of Marines, and like what I was expecting. Because at the time I worked it out with my CO or my XO, oh, and CO, but that I didn't have to actually go to every single event as long as I thoroughly briefed all the team, and I did. Um, and even though some events had instances that occurred that needed my immediate attention, those instances were already planned out for because of the proper briefing that I gave them and the plans of actions. So I took all of that to Okinawa, and when I got there, um, much more humid, much more humid than Indiana, uh, but the food was delicious. So I was sweating through everything, and but eating my way through all of that. I was like, all right, I'm gonna be fine. I'm gonna sweat, but maybe not in my food. I'll just eat over here and bring it over. Um, and ended up running, the team of Marines. Actually, some of the guests you had on, I worked with them. Um, and funny story about that. It was like my second day in the office. Like I was looking around the bullpen and I needed to find a desk. And I didn't have a computer just yet, but I sat myself essentially between the office of where the staff and the chief was and the officers were and where the bullpen is. And the first day I took in what everybody was doing and how the shop was running, just to make notes of anything I needed to interject in. Very little. The second day, and I heard a chuckle after I did this, was as the Marines were closing up shop, the chief came out and gave his brief to everybody, and they went about their business and closing up shop. But nobody cleaned anything up. They kind of just left it as it was. It's just a huge mess, a huge bomb going off. So I guess my immediate introduction to them, instead of my "Hey, I'm the new guy here," um, was as soon as the first corporal touched the door, I said, "Wait, yeah, the chief gave you your brief, and you guys are free to go for the day, but we need to secure the office. Trash everywhere. It looks like a tornado went through. Like somebody probably rolled in that corner over there." I forget the intricacies of the speech that I gave, but it was colorful, and it was I want to say colorful and vibrant. And I heard a chuckle come from the chief and the officer's office. Um, and afterwards, he explained like, "Yeah, I laughed. It was hilarious that you waited until then to tell him to do something. You became the sergeant. You weren't just a sergeant just showing up. You became the sergeant." I was like, "Well, yeah, that's what you have me here for, to lead these Marines. And leading them isn't just assigning them stories, it's also reminding them that, hey, we're still Marines. We still have to do these other things." Um, it, I think at first there was a little bit of animosity between us, as there typically is. Wait, and that's the Marine Corps. That's the
Yep.
world we live in. But as they matured themselves, and now that I see them as staff and COs themselves, or officers, or chief warrant officers, they, I could see some of the things that I instilled in them apply there, and I'm proud of them. Like they're doing amazing, great work, and hopefully they also still continue to clean their office. I don't know if they do it themselves, but I hope they keep them clean and presentable. Um, but yeah, it was fun. It was a great time going from MPA duty to Okinawa, and officially running a team of Marines, and having the support of the staff and COs and the officers, to provide the guidance that I needed to better become a better leader that I was able to push on to you and apply in our instances when I became the chief.
The Oath We Took podcast, hosted by Marine Corps veteran Tab Bartley, tells the Marine Corps story through the Marines who served. While every story is unique, the common bond is the oath they all took. Tune in Mondays at 5 p.m. Eastern on Wreaths Across America Radio to catch these engaging conversations. Tab is also supporting the Military Women's Memorial through her Wreaths Across America sponsorship page. For every veteran's wreath you sponsor at wreathsacrossamerica.org/The Oath We Took, $5 will go directly to the Military Women's Memorial, the leading memorial and education center honoring the commitment, contributions, and experiences of servicewomen. Once again, to donate, go to wreathsacrossamerica.org/The Oath We Took.
And from Oki, is that when you then went to the district, or did you go somewhere else? I couldn't remember. That's what I thought. I thought you went from Oki to the district.
I did. I went. So I was in Okinawa. I got fapped over from the MLG. Ended up at the MEF, and then stayed base side when the MEF was doing their MEF stuff, and then the base still needed people, so I stayed there. And then I went to become the first wing PA chief, and then from there went to Murph D in Australia. So I helped set up their public affairs shop down there, and loved my time in Australia. By the way, that's why I go by Joe instead of Jose, or just Nava. Aussies, I love them to death. Love them to death. Can't really pronounce my name correctly, so I'd say, hey, because my initials are J and O, just go Joe. Just Joe. It works, and much better, less awkward introductions as my time there went. But from my main duty in Oki, I went to 6th District. Originally, I was going to go to 4th District in Pennsylvania, but they needed somebody to replace somebody down at the 6th District. And I was hoping to go back to California or stay in Oki another year to keep running operations there. But because of the background that I had as an MPA and the successful tour that I had, they needed a PA chief with that background to help guide and lead Marines on MPA duty. And luckily, the person I replaced was doing that, and I didn't have to do too much outside to tweak a couple of things here and there, but mostly was building that relationship at the district level between the district staff and the public affairs offices and the subordinate commands, because that is hugely impactful and important. And if you don't have that higher command support, then you're fighting two fronts. So that was my biggest thing.
And I think it's so crazy, like looking back now too, like we were essentially like working remote before remote was like a thing. And then on top of that, like your team of Marines, like you had a few who were with you, but then the rest of us were across like the southeastern region. Like we were all in a different state, and those were the Marines you were managing. And like you said, like you replaced somebody who all the MPAs really liked. I have no idea how district felt about them, but from an MPA standpoint, we all really, really liked and had a good chief. And so I think anytime in the Marine Corps, as you were saying, like, you know, it's like, it's a little MPA duty, because you're on your own, you build this bond with the other MPAs. And if anybody comes in, it's automatic, like, it doesn't matter what you've done. It's just a little like, what you gonna make us do? Because that relationship with district and the RS is oftentimes not the it's interesting one. And something that like I was amazed, I think, especially like as it further went on, but even looking back at how well you were with managing what district wanted, and how oftentimes you could kind of shine light on it. Like it would take a lot of like, okay, I know you guys asked for this, but this makes no sense. Like, do you have any idea what my MPAs are doing? And you were able to so often communicate with them, communicate with us, who oftentimes, like, you saw the worst of us. I will be honest. Like, I think MPA duty is something where you probably see as a district chief the worst of, like, how is that? Like, maybe we'll just get into it from your angle, because I know that you did not see me at the best of like my like light and shining and like, right. And that's how we all were, but it was because, like you said, the stress and stuff, but the way that you were able to, one, it's because you had been on NPA duty. Like that one, there was a reality of what it is, but you had to manage, I feel like so much more than other billets.
I mean, that was that's a great way to put that. There's different levels of management that I had to be aware of and apply my skills to. Considering that at that time, that's one of the first times we had a recruiter come and try to take on the position of marketing chief. And the one we had, great Marine, awesome Marine. I still chat with him every now and again when I see him, and he's doing phenomenal. But he was with our ad agency, and we didn't really have him present at our district. So I had to put on my big boy pants and fill that role, and my role managing. And I don't like managing Marines. I like inspiring and leading you, because I don't need to manage you. You're all adults. I'm going to give you the information, and you're going to decide what to do. But I'm also going to give you the pros and cons of those decisions, so that way you make sure you probably make the decision I want you to make, but you're still going to end up making that decision. And what I did with the officers, because as you know, when they get to the district, a lot of them, one of them will be a PA. Now they are. Now they both should both be PAs. But at the time, one was a PA and one was an officer that came in from another field to take on this additional billet. And I said, look, granted, you're both officers, you're ultimately going to make all the decisions you need to make sure the office is the way it needs to go. But I'm going to recommend things, and this is the perspective that it's going to come from, because I was an MPA, because this is not my first time around the recruiting world. At that time, it was my third time with recruiting, because MCRD San Diego was half recruiting, half base ops, and then you have RS Indianapolis. So my third time around, I'm pretty familiar with what Marine Corps recruiting is. So I took that knowledge and I applied it to those situations. The biggest thing there was essentially working with and tailoring their expectations as far as what they expected the MPAs to do. And providing the lens that they may not have had as looking at MPA duty, because during inspections, right, they had a sheet. They wanted to follow the sheet to the letter. And I would look at their grading and say, well, did you know that because they were deficient here, they had to do A, B, C, and D over here, and ultimately the RS was successful. So why are we dinging them on this one small thing because they didn't hit it 100%, but they're doing great and the command loves them? Make it make sense to me. And these briefings that none of you are actually able to see were tense at times. They were, but ultimately I was able to provide that support to the MPAs and the district, so that way the district knew when we send out specific comms initiatives that we wanted to achieve or goals for a different program. We wanted to make sure that we took into account what each individual RS was doing and work it into their comm plan as well. Because your plate was full. There's no need for me to add more to your plate. If our Marines could take some of that work on for you, we did.
And I think the other thing too is, like, for a lot of MPAs, you were literally the only protection they had. Like, I was lucky. I had a command that, like, it didn't matter what I said or did, they were going to back me. If I had an idea, they were like, yeah, that's what Bartley wants to do. And yeah, she knows what she's talking about. That ain't us. We're just going to back her. But so many MPAs, that is not even sort of their experience. So you literally are the only protection, and you're not even seeing these Marines or these commands like more than like a few times a year. Like, I want people to understand the gravity of like what you were doing and how you were able, like, when you say meetings were tense, I believe it, because there were meetings we were in that I know they were tense. And we would have our group chat and they'd be like, Bartley, it's time to be quiet, or like so on and so forth. And it's like, okay, great. Yeah, thanks, guys. But like, I just want people to really understand like the gravity and the level. Like, it was just like a whole nother level. And again, it's not like it was today where, like, yeah, we had a group text, but it's not like where you could, like, communication was not as easy as it is right now on all things, or to know where people were personally, mentally. Like, it was just you would have a conversation and have to, in a 20-minute conversation, decipher everything about them and what was going on to then make a decision of like how and what could you do for that MPA and district. And I just think, like, holy moly, I just like think back on it and I'm just like, dang, I should have been a little nicer, little calmer on things.
That wasn't your job. That was my job. And I'm glad that I was able to do that. And honestly, the guiding principle that I had for me was essentially the basic tenets of the Marine Corps, right? It was mission accomplishment. That's regardless of what we do or feel, that's gonna happen. Then there's troop welfare. And because I took that to heart as an NCO when I became a staff NCO and led that way, I wanted to ensure that anything that I did was to the betterment of the Marines under my charge. And regardless of what people saw of me or how they viewed any of the work that I did, my main objective was still taking care of the Marines, because that would achieve that mission for us. A good team of Marines will always achieve your mission. And I think ultimately that rapport I built with the RS command staff, that again, you may not have been privy to at your level as an MPA, but the XOs and the COs and the sergeant major that I talked to, the RIs that I knew, some of them that I knew when I was on duty as an MPA myself, that relationship that I built with them allowed me to just essentially, if I knew the MPA was having an issue or were deficient in an area, I would pick up the phone and call first the MPA, figure out what's going on. Then I'd call the command and essentially the XO or the RI and be like, hey, so-and-so is having a hard time. What can we do to help them? I know what I can do at my level, but I'm asking you, what can you do to support this MPA, to help guide this junior Marine? Because they have nobody else other than the people that it's around them, and then me way over here. And I'm pretty sure the command's going to frown about me driving 8 hours to go meet somebody just to make sure that they're okay. So we got to work together. And ultimately, I think everybody was successful. Um, in the end, there were some bumps and bruises that they may have picked up along the way, but they were successful, and that's, I mean, looking at you and your career, and the things that you're doing now and that you want to achieve, especially having your family. I'm proud. I can't say it any other way. I really can't. Like, I had a little part of that, and I was able to see that growth, and I'm proud of seeing that. I know back then when I was Staff Sergeant Nava, I may not have been very vocal about it because I kept my praises very guarded. But I think I think back at it, and all the Marines achieved great things, and I was happy to be able to provide that, be that conduit for them to speak to higher levels of command, and be that cover for them when they needed it to make sure that they were able to operate how they needed to operate. Um, and yet, some of those things were interesting. They're very interesting, and those conversations that I had on the phone would be ringing off the hook. But I would always make time. I
And
wanted to
I
make time.
and you did, and I think too, like, and I'm somebody who doesn't need compliments anyway. They make me feel more awkward than like anything. Like, I don't know what to do with that. Tell me I suck at something and how to fix it. But
Eventually,
what I think really like matters a lot more is we knew that we could come to you. And I think like especially like, with we had a really hard time as MPAs because again, we built this like tribe. We were like really the only support we had, the only people going through the same thing, like in the same area. And when Lopez passed, I think we all I mean, we had to rely on you. We all had a lot of emotions that could have had they had a lot of ripple effect. And I know I was going to get emotional because anytime, I think about that and think about Lopez. And I think we all knew, and we did. I mean, we came to you so much for so much of that, and we were able to safely get our emotions out, which I think is something that like we don't talk enough about in the Marine Corps. Like we were able to. I mean, there were times we were so angry. I remember being so angry and being in conversations, and I mean, like pretty much like screaming and cussing and like I don't care what's gonna happen type thing. And you were able to actually listen, calm us down in a way that like I think that means even more. Like the fact that we were able to do that and be that safe space. I think that really says and shows how your leadership impacted us.
you know, with Michael's passing is as unfortunate as all that was. I mean, it was. It was unforeseen. Nobody knew that it would have gone that way. And I mean, the PAO at the time was just very, very clean cut about it. Just this happened. I'm like, okay. Um, Anybody check on the Marines? Anybody check on the Marines? Nobody. I was on leave. I was on leave when it happened, and my first thought was, well, I need to check on how everyone else is doing. How are they taking it? And at that time, like I took my rank off in my head. Like I'm just Joe now, and I want to know how you are doing because we don't talk about it enough, and we see it in the advertisement that the Marine Corps, high speed, low drag stuff. Um, but we really don't talk about that support and mental support that people need. And sometimes you do have to take that rank off and sit down and talk to people and engage because yeah, troop warfare is great if you say it, but in practice it's dirty and it's much more complex and intricate than you can ever imagine because everybody's different. Everybody's different. And I was glad that I was able to do that because I learned so much more about everybody and how I was able to take care of them and provide that support to them because I forget I forget what they wanted to do. And even I just said that's dumb. Why would you do that? That's not smart. That's just a drain on resources. That's not something that we should be putting on the MPAs, especially right now. Luckily, I mean, I got my ass chewed for that, but what's one for another? Like it just happens.
No, and now that you say that, I remember that it was some crazy, crazy report that would have done nothing for anybody, and they were asking for some crazy turnaround, and it was, I think, the same week that was going to be his memorial service, and it was something like absolutely crazy, and we were all like, "Are you serious? Like, do you know how small our MOS is? Do you know?" Like, we talk to each other every single day, and that's like, can't take the 5 minutes for us to be able to like mourn him, like, and yeah, so that, I mean, again, there were so many other times that you had done that, but I think it was really, you know, in that moment, especially for us, that it was just like, yeah,
I mean,
there.
unfortunately, that's not the first time I had to do that. Luckily, we had more support in Okinawa, like when Medina and Hug passed. I was down in Darwin, and I got the call from my PAO, who got the call from the lieutenant colonel. And yeah, like I called from Darwin to Okinawa to the sergeant at the time, and I said, "Hey, check on the Marines. I don't care what you're doing. Check, see how they're doing. Ask them. They may have learned about it through their own private channels, or this isn't the first thing that you've heard. Check on them, and then check on them again later. Don't just do it one and done. Like, I'm good. No, we personally worked and knew with these people, and knew about them and knew their lives. So check on them." When I got back to Okinawa, they appreciated that I took the time to do that. And the other staff and COs, they did the same thing, but they're much more physically. They're physically closer than I was.
Yeah.
But we were such a great team at that unit, especially at that time, that we were able to essentially synchronize our leadership to make sure that the Marines were taken care of, especially in situations like that. So when Michael passed, that's the way I felt. It did not change. I wanted to make sure that everybody was good, and I did, and everyone is good, and I hope everyone continues being good, and that they can always, even now. Again, I'm not their boss. I'm not their staff and CO. I am just Joe at this point. If they want to reach out and chat for anything, I'm here. I haven't gone anywhere. I know I'm quiet on social media, but that's by design. I prefer just having those conversations with people instead of advertising what I am or what I'm doing.
And speaking about what you are doing now, so you've transitioned out of the Marine Corps and now you work for the Peace Corps. It
I
seems like
do.
a bit of a 180.
I'm just as surprised as you are. So as I was transitioning out, I did not have a job lined up, because I was expecting to get extended a little bit longer. So I wasn't 100% prepared. I didn't want to go to school right away, because I just got married. My son was on the way. So all the things that could have happened when someone transitions, that Lifetime movie stuff,
They did.
yeah, that was happening. While I was still, leading the Marines that I had, particularly the two at the district, to make sure that they were set up for my departure. So I was doing all those things, and I took the lessons from the TAP classes. Granted, it was a bunch of information coming through, and a bunch, but knowing RMOS and the people that we engage with, I already had a lot of that information that I needed, and I knew where I needed to apply. So I saved up money, and we were living off our savings, and I was applying to every federal position. I was a PA. I didn't care where I went. I really did not care. I wanted to go somewhere. Not that I don't like South Carolina. Don't get me wrong. I'm just not a big fan of humidity. It's just too damn humid here for me. I prefer being back on the West Coast. But I applied to every position, and I interviewed for a couple, and interviewed for the Peace Corps. Funny enough, at the time, that's when Zoom was kicking off and Skype and all that stuff, and they sent me a link to interview over Zoom, and for some reason I couldn't get it to work. So I'm like 5 minutes late to this interview, couldn't get it to work. I'm freaking out on my own end, like, okay, but I gotta be calm. Let me just reach out over the phone. So I called them, and at the time, he was my boss who was interviewing me. He picks up and he goes, "Hello, who's this? I was like, oh, this is Joe. You're supposed to be interviewing me. Like, oh, hey, let me put you on speakerphone. There's like 6 other people in the room that I was supposed to be interviewing with for that panel. Um, Apparently, me being late didn't impact that. They loved what I had to tell them and the skill set, particularly the soft skills that I learned in the Marine Corps that I was able to bring into the Peace Corps. And yes, the irony of me going from the Marine Corps to the Peace Corps did not escape me one bit. It still doesn't escape me now. Like, it's hilarious. But I was able to bring what those skills that I learned, particularly from MPA duty and being at MCRD San Diego, over to being a public affairs specialist, the Peace Corps, so successful enough that they asked me to be the acting deputy director of programmatic communications. So once I saw the check and I was like, oh yeah, I'll do that. That sounds good to me. I was gonna do it anyways, but that definitely sweetened the pot. But we were able to build it was almost like having MPAs all over again because we went remote due to COVID. I actually started working in Chicago and had to move my family from San Diego or South Carolina to Chicago.
Oh yeah, I remember that now.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, I actually went a month before everybody to look for houses. So being on MPA duty, one of the recruiters that I worked with was like, yo, I live here. I'm on I&I duty. You can crash with me. So I said, great, this is awesome. So I started looking for a house, found a house in not the southern suburb of Chicago, but south of that.
Yeah.
So I'm in South Holland, Illinois. I have to ride a train and work. Essentially, any movie where you see somebody commuting into a professional work environment, that's what I was doing.
That's you.
Yeah, that was me.
That was you.
And luckily, I worked in the federal district in the same district as the state reps. At the federal level, we're on the 20th floor, and we saw what they consider a giant metal flamingo. I don't know what the artist was thinking, but I don't consider it a flamingo. It looks great piece of art. Could never see the flamingo. No matter what angle I looked at it, I didn't see it. But across the street was the federal courthouse, and in that I had my son in daycare. So not only was I going into work, my wife at the time, she was working at a different federal agency 3 blocks away from me, and our son had to go to daycare. So we're all at 5 a.m. hopping on the train, riding into
Jeez.
Chicago, like grumpy as all get out. Like, he was fine. He was asleep, so he was good. He enjoyed the train ride, but it allowed me to take my breaks, to go visit my wife, to visit my son at daycare, and the immense pressure you feel as a communicator within the Marine Corps was not present. It was not there. I actually worked too fast when I got hired on, that I had to be reminded that if I work too fast, they cannot keep up. So I had to slow and plan out my week and plan out my work schedule and be in charge of that to make sure that I gave ample time to my superiors or any of the peers that I was working with, so they can do their part. But it allowed me to essentially mellow out the Marine Corps aspect of it, but bring in those skills that I gained and apply them now. So it's the same pie that we're all having. Both agencies, both organizations. We're both trying to get people to go to austere environments and do something bigger than themselves. And the mission for me was the same. So overall, my end goal was the same: is how do I get people from A to B? How do I convince them to do that and tell them that this is a worthwhile endeavor? And I was fortunate enough to learn all those aspects of the federal, that a federal employee would go through in the Peace Corps, because it allowed me to transition, well, in a steady pace for me. Yeah, I love it. It's fun.
I love that correlation. And I never even thought of that until you said that. Like, really, like you're doing the same thing. You're finding the what's in it for me? What's your goals? How can I make how can I make these align? And like, I'm looking at the clock and I'm like, how are we already at like 50 minutes? So
Good chat.
I'm gonna have you on the podcast again, for sure. Where we'll do a deeper dive. But before I ask the last question, I will ask, is there anything we didn't talk about that you want to talk about?
No, actually, I think we mentioned the most important aspect. That true welfare is more than just a slogan. It's actually getting out there and getting dirty and taking care of your people, be they Marines or other employees or family and friends. It doesn't matter who. You should be there for each other.
I cannot thank you enough for coming on, sharing your story. Like, I absolutely loved our conversation. There's so many nuggets, so many things. And so I will ask you the last question, which is, if you had to take the oath again, would you?
You know, yeah, I would. There's no question about it. I definitely would. I would do it 100 times over, in the exact same manner that I would have done it, because I gained that experience and was able to provide that experience to everybody else. Would I have been an officer in a previous life? Maybe 101 lives later, sure. But I enjoyed what I did as me and as that staff NCO that I eventually became, leading Marines. So yes, 100% would do it again.
This is the Oath We Took podcast, and you just heard a piece of Nava's story. You now know one more Marine and one more piece of Marine Corps history. His sacrifices matter. His stories matter. Not every Marine story is the same. We didn't all join the Marine Corps for the same reason. What is the same is the oath we all took. An oath that easily could have ended in death, and for some, it did. So listeners, instead of asking you to thank a Marine for their service, I am going to challenge you to continue to listen to their stories and